After releasing from the Marine Corps, Connor was having a hard time adjusting to civilian life, so he decided to take a 1 year long road trip across the US. But shortly into his trip, he had a bizarre experience that he cannot explain. But before we get into his encounter, welcome back to Dark Wilderness. If you've had an encounter that you would like to share on the show, please email it to me at the link below. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And since I'll be uploading multiple times every week, before you call it a night, fist pump that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Today's encounter comes from Connor, and it happened in 2005 up at the Bridger-Tenton National Forest in northwestern Wyoming. The Bridger-Tenton National Forest is located just south of Yellowstone National Park, and in 2005, Connor was 24 years old. He had just released from the Marine Corps. He had joined the Marines when he was 18, so he had served 6 years in the Marines. He had done a combat tour in Iraq, and when he released, he was really having a hard time adjusting to civilian life. He was really missing the structure that the military provided him, and he really had no idea what he wanted to do with the rest of his life going forward. He was getting pretty depressed, so he decided he was going to take a year-long trip across the US just to kind of rediscover himself and just figure out what he wanted to do with the rest of his life going forward. So in June of 2005, he sold all of his possessions, he bought a van, he converted it to a sleeper-style van, and then he set off for a 1 year road trip across the US. He left his home near Camp Pendleton, California, and he made his way into Arizona. Once he was in Arizona, he spent a couple of weeks just kind of wandering around the state, taking in different sites, doing the odd job here or there, and then he spent a week with the Navajo Nation. After that, he moved north into Utah, which was his home state, and he stopped in Cedar City. His brother lived in Cedar City, and he had actually not seen his brother since Thanksgiving of 2001, so it had been quite a few years since he had reconnected with his brother. So he stopped in at his brother's place and spent a couple of weeks just kind of hanging out with his brother, reconnecting with him. They actually did some backpacking and camping in Zion National Forest as well. After spending a few weeks with his brother, he made his way up to Salt Lake City, which was his home city. His plan was to spend about 3 weeks visiting with his parents up in Salt Lake. However, once he got there, he ended up reconnecting with a group of friends from before he joined the Marines, and it turned out that one of his buddies owned a construction business, and he was dealing with a lot of theft and vandalism at this one specific site. So his friend actually offered him a job to do night security of this site, just to, make sure nothing got stolen, make sure nobody came on the property, vandalized equipment. So Connor kind of thought about it for a second. He was like, you know what? I could use this extra money. Yes, I do have some money saved up and I have been doing odd jobs, but I can just not say no to this opportunity to make a little extra money to help me on this trip. So he said to his buddy, you know what? Yeah, I'll do it. So he ended up staying in Salt Lake for almost 2 months doing this night security job. At the end of September, the construction project wrapped up and Connor made his way north into Montana. He had always wanted to go to the Yellowstone National Park. He had never been there before. So he made his way north through Montana, and as he was driving towards Yellowstone, he started to kind of think about it a little bit. He started to think about how much camping would cost him in Yellowstone. So once he got to the Bridger-Tenton National Forest, he decided, you know what, this is pretty close to Yellowstone. I'm going to spend a few days in this park, and I'm just going to do day trips from here into Yellowstone. So he kind of was driving around the park a little bit, trying to find somewhere where he could park his van. And he came across this old road that ran up the side of this mountain. So he stopped his vehicle, started looking down the road. The road looked pretty rough, but Connor decided, you know what, my van can handle this. So he turned off the main highway and he started making his way down this road that went up the side of this mountain. The road was incredibly rough. The van was shaking the entire time. And Connor was starting to think that, maybe my van won't make it down this road. However, a few hundred yards later, he came to a turn, and right when he got to that turn, he noticed that just off on the left-hand side of this road, there was a little bit of a clearing that overlooked this large meadow that looked down into this valley. He saw the perfect spot where he would be able to park his van, so he pulled his van into this spot, kind of angled it so that his windshield was facing towards that meadow, right where that valley sloped down, and he decided, this is where I'm camping. So he turned off the van, hopped outside, and took a look around the immediate area where his van was parked. Then he took a look at his watch, and it was about 4 hours before dark. So he decided he was going to go kind of just explore the area around the van, just so he would know what's there, what kind of terrain features, just really some of that situational awareness that he developed over his career with the Marines. So he grabbed a bottle of water and then he set off walking into the woods. He walked around for about 3 hours, decided, okay, you know what, I'm going to start making my way back to the van now. It's going to be dark in about an hour. And once he got back to his van, it was already dark. So once he was back there, he hopped inside. He ended up making himself a sandwich. Then he lied down in his bed, pulled out his laptop, and he started looking at pictures from when he was in the Marines. He looked at them for about 2 hours, just going through endless pictures on his laptop of all of his old Marine buddies. And he came across one picture in particular that really hit him close to home. It was a picture of a really good friend of his that he had done his tour with over in Iraq that unfortunately did not make it home when he came home. So it was hitting him really hard seeing this picture of his buddy. So he closed up his laptop, put it away, reached over to a small cabinet right by the sliding door, grabbed a bottle of whiskey, and then he made his way outside. Once he was outside, he just kind of stood there staring up at the stars for a few minutes, just thinking about his buddies, thinking about all those old pictures. Then he removed the lid of the bottle, held it up, let out a loud "raw," took a shot, and then made his way back into the van. Once he was back in the van, he put the bottle of whiskey away. Then he lied down in his bed. He could not fall asleep. His mind was just racing too much, thinking about all those old photos. And as he was lying there staring up at the ceiling, he noticed that he could see the details on the ceiling a lot better than he was able to before. So he was kind of trying to figure out where any source of light would be coming from that would be illuminating the roof of his van. So he kind of got up, turned around, and he looked out the windshield. And across that valley where that meadow was, he could see a really bright light kind of moving what looked like in the woods on the other side of this valley. His first thought was that, this was probably a spotlight from a hiker or possibly somebody's night lighting game. So he really did not think too much of it. So he kind of turned around, lied back down in his bed. And about 5 minutes later, he noticed that all of a sudden this light was just getting absolutely intense. The entire interior of his van was completely lit up. So he was, at this point now, was thinking that whoever had that spotlight has come right up to his van. So he's reached underneath his bed, and he grabbed his pistol. He was holding his pistol in his hand just in case, because he does not know who these people are with this super bright light or what they want and why they're coming up to his van. And that light, though, just continued to get brighter. When that light became so bright that he could not even open his eyes, it was like this spotlight was just shining directly through the windshield right on his face. He just yelled out, "You're messing with the wrong Marine. I'm armed. Get out of here." And there was no response. He heard nobody reply back. He heard no sounds outside whatsoever. This light just continued to just absolutely illuminate the inside of his van for about the next 5 minutes. Connor was absolutely infuriated at this point. He actually contemplated going outside and confronting whoever that was. However, at the same time, he did not want to go out there because that light was so incredibly bright that he feared that if it was shone directly in his face, he would not be able to see who it was and he would not be able to defend himself. So he decided he was just going to remain in the van and hope that whoever this was would just go away and leave him alone. After a few minutes, though, he could hear what sounded like a super strong wind blowing through the trees coming directly towards his van. All of a sudden, he felt his van shaking violently. He could hear all the trees outside getting blown around in this wind. He could hear them cracking and snapping. He could hear sticks and branches falling from the trees, landing on top of his van. And the entire time, he was just thinking, great, a big tree's going to break, land on my van. But at the same time, he was really trying to figure out how whoever that was outside would be able to stand against this type of wind, especially with all the tree branches falling and everything like that. Because that light was not moving. There was no shadows changing inside of his van. This light was staying completely still and just illuminating the inside of his van. That went on for about 5 minutes, and then everything just abruptly stopped. The light went out, the sound of the wind was gone, And then Connor just kind of lied there in his bed for a couple of minutes, just listening, trying to figure out what exactly just happened. So he very slowly kind of got up, turned, looked out his windshield just to see if he could see any sign of that light or any sign of whoever may have had that light. And he didn't see anybody outside. He saw no lights off in the distance. So he slowly got out of the van and he started moving around the van, just kind of taking stock of any type of damage to his van. Luckily, no massive branches had landed on it, but he was looking around the immediate area in front of his van, kind of expecting to see somebody crushed by a tree branch, but there was nobody there. So Connor decided he was just going to go back into the van, just kind of try to brush off whatever just happened, and he would just deal with it in the morning. Come morning, Connor got out of his van just after dawn, started walking around the van again, looking for any sign of anybody at all. He saw no signs of anybody, but he did notice that everywhere around the van, all the trees were broken, there were branches down absolutely everywhere. So he decided he was going to walk down the road a little bit just to see how far this wind damage really affected this road. However, once he made it about 50 yards away from his van, all the trees were completely fine. Connor found this pretty strange, so he decided, you know what, I'm going to walk the other way down the road and see how far the wind damage is down that way. And the same thing with when he was going the other way. He made it about 50 yards from his van, and all the trees were fine. So he spent about an hour kind of wandering around the area, and it seemed like everywhere around the van for about a 50-yard diameter was completely obliterated by this windstorm, but nothing anywhere else. So Connor decided at this point, okay, that something really weird just happened. I don't know what, but I'm going to get out of here. I'm not staying here anymore. So he got into his van, kind of tried to make his way around all the fallen branches in that area, got back onto the road, made his way down the mountain, and then he continued up to Yellowstone. Over the course of the next several days, he was really thinking about the events that happened to him that night, and he really started to wonder if those events, if that light and that wind could have been caused by a UFO. So he was really trying to figure out exactly what had happened to him. So he found an internet cafe and he did a little bit of research. He went on some different sites, some different forums, and he discovered that what had happened to him very closely reflected other UFO cases. Connor's advice is if you're ever out in the woods and you happen to see a bright light, he said, don't ever assume anything. There's stuff that happens to people every day that other people may not believe or may laugh at. He said that this was by far the single most horrifying experience of his life, and he does not wish that upon anybody. Well, that's it for today's encounter. As always, thanks for joining us, and if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments below. I'd really love to know your thoughts on this. And if you guys haven't done so already, please fist bump that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.